When an avoidant finally feels safe enough to love, the most shocking thing isn't what they say, it's what they reveal. You see, avoidants don't show up in relationships the way most people do. They don't immediately wear their heart on their sleeve or lay their soul bare in the first few months. No, they test the environment. They scan for threats. They calculate the emotional risk of exposure, not because they're cold, but because at some point love hurt deeply, and survival meant retreating, not connecting. What happens when an avoidant begins to trust you is psychological transformation. It's like watching someone step out of their emotional bunker after years of war, blinking into the sunlight, wondering if the battlefield has finally cleared. And here's what most people miss. When avoidants finally feel safe, they don't fall in love. They unmask in love. They begin to show you a version of themselves even their friends, family, and past partners have never met. Talking about the core self, the raw, unfiltered identity that's been hidden behind layers of intellectualization, distraction, and independence. This is a massive shift in psychology. Because until this point, their connection with you may have felt inconsistent or even distant. You might have wondered, why won't they just open up? But the avoidant doesn't withhold because they don't care. They withhold because they do. And caring means danger, exposure, risk of rejection, repetition of past pain. The irony? The more they love you, the more likely they are to hide it first. That's the paradox of avoidant attachment. Love triggers their deepest fear. If I let you in, I will lose myself. But the moment they start to believe that love won't cost them their freedom, that it might actually give them more of themselves, something profound happens. They slowly start peeling off the armor they've worn for years. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in subtle, sacred moments. They begin to let you see. They'll talk about their past without spinning it. They'll admit fears without sarcasm. They'll let you witness their struggle, their confusion, their dreams without controlling the narrative. And here's the key. They don't do this because you demanded it. They do it because your consistency showed them safety. And safety, to the avoidant, is more seductive than romance. It's what makes love sustainable. Now let's go deeper. From a philosophical perspective, what they're giving you in this moment is a piece of their essence. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. Avoidants have been shaped by wounds. But when they feel secure enough to love, they use that freedom to choose connection over self-protection. That's not just vulnerability, that's courage. And it's critical you don't miss this moment, because once they begin to reveal this hidden version of themselves, they're watching you just as closely. They're asking, can you handle my truth? Can you love me past the polish? If you panic, criticize, or retreat, they don't just shut down, they shut off. The door that took years to crack open swings shut again, maybe permanently. But if you hold space, if you meet them with presence instead of pressure, you become the first person in their life who ever made love feel safe. That kind of trust, that kind of unmasking, it doesn't happen twice. So here's the truth you need to sit with. When an avoidant shows you who they really are, they're not just loving you, they're trusting you with their life's evolution. Don't miss it. When avoidants feel safe enough to love, their behavior doesn't explode into passion, it deepens into precision. Most people are looking for loud declarations, grand gestures, nonstop affirmations. But avoidants, they don't love on stage. They love like architects, quietly, deliberately building structures that can last. And this is where so many people miss the signal, because what looks like emotional subtlety is often intentional commitment. It's quiet on the surface, but underneath something foundational is being laid down. Avoidants love differently, not because they're broken, but because their nervous system was wired to protect, not pursue. Emotional intimacy for them doesn't start with a kiss or a text. It starts with a choice to stay present even when every instinct says run. And when they choose to stay, when they feel secure, they stop reacting out of fear and begin relating from a place of intention. So instead of dramatic I love yous shouted across rooms, you start to see them show up in real, tangible ways. They remember the small things you said. They protect your peace. They adjust their routines to include you. Most importantly, they don't flee when closeness creeps in. They lean into it on purpose. That's a shift, not just in behavior, but in identity. They're moving from the self-protective to the co-creative. And here's something powerful. When an avoidant starts to love you intentionally, it's because they no longer see love as a trap. They've redefined it. Love to them has historically been associated with obligation, loss of self, or emotional chaos. But when they feel safe, truly safe, they begin to understand that love can be peace, not pressure, space, not suffocation, expansion, not erasure. That's when they move from surviving connection to engineering it. They become present. They don't disappear for days when things feel intense. They don't pick fights to create distance. They begin practicing a kind of emotional discipline, not for you, but for them. Because suddenly, closeness isn't something to fear, it's something they deserve. From a psychological lens, this shift reflects what we call earned secure attachment. That means an avoidant has restructured their internal beliefs about love through experience, not theory. They didn't just read a book about vulnerability, they lived it with you. And the reward for that bravery is a new capacity to love deliberately, not reactively, not avoidantly, but with full awareness of the risk and full willingness to take it anyway. Now, some people will miss this kind of love. They'll say they're not romantic enough or they're too quiet. But that's because they don't know what it costs an avoidant to show up every day consistently in intimacy. They don't know how much inner rewiring it takes to go from fleeing to facing. So if you're with an avoidant who's showing up for you, not in flashy ways, but in solid ones, you're not being overlooked. You're being chosen quietly, constantly. And let me tell you something real. Consistency from an avoidant is the loudest form of love you'll ever experience. So here's your takeaway. Something you can't afford to forget. Don't confuse the absence of noise with the absence of depth. When avoidants love you deliberately, they're not just in a relationship, they're rewriting their emotional DNA. That kind of love, it's quiet, but it changes everything. When an avoidant starts to feel safe in love, one of the most profound shifts you'll witness is how they begin to sacrifice their solitude. Not because they have to, but because they want to. That's not something they do lightly. For most avoidants, space is not just a preference, it's a psychological necessity. It's how they regulate their emotions, how they protect their identity, and how they escape from the overwhelming demand that closeness can sometimes feel like. But here's the key. When an avoidant trusts the relationship, when they no longer see you as a threat to their autonomy, space stops being their escape route and starts becoming a resource they're willing to share. They slowly, and often silently, begin to let you in. Not just into their time or their routines, but into the most sacred part of their existence, their inner world. You'll notice the shift in small ways first. They start texting you in the middle of the day just to check in. They invite you into their environment, their home, their rituals, their silence. They stop needing to disappear to recharge. In fact, they begin to recharge with you, not away from you. And this is critical. It means you're no longer viewed as a source of depletion. You're becoming a source of stability. That's emotional evolution. To most people, it might look like a natural progression, spending more time together, more integration, more shared plans. But to an avoidant, this is a radical act of vulnerability because historically, their space has been their shield, was the last line of defense against feeling consumed or controlled. But now they're inviting you in. That's not just behavioral, it's philosophical. They've redefined what closeness means, and you're no longer the invader, you've become a partner in peace. And it goes deeper. When an avoidant gives you access to their space, they're also giving you access to their patterns, their unedited behaviors, their natural rhythms. It's not a performance, it's real. You begin to see who they are when they're not managing impressions or emotionally regulating through distance. That level of exposure requires trust. It requires them to believe on some level that you won't try to colonize their identity the moment they let you close. From a psychological perspective, this is an example of secure functioning behavior. It means they're beginning to operate from a belief that love doesn't mean losing themselves. It means finding new ground within themselves while being connected to someone else. That's a monumental shift because for the avoidant, the core fear has always been enmeshment. The idea that to be close is to be consumed. But in a safe relationship, that narrative begins to unravel. Closeness becomes not a trap, but a choice. And when they choose you, when they start inviting you in, not out of obligation, but from a place of freedom, they are rewriting the entire story they've told themselves about love. It's not about giving up independence. It's about expanding it to include someone else. And here's the part you can't ignore. When they make space for you, they're not just making room in their schedule, they're making room in their identity. That's not convenience, that's commitment. So here's the bottom line, the insight I want you to carry forward. And when an avoidant begins to sacrifice space for connection, they're not losing themselves. They're trusting you with the most sacred thing they've ever protected, their freedom. Honor it. When avoidants feel safe enough to love, there's another unexpected shift that takes place, one that most people completely overlook. They begin to initiate emotional connection, not just react to it, not just tolerate it, but initiate it. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, vulnerability has historically been a response to pressure. Something extracted under emotional duress or offered in small, carefully controlled doses. But when safety is present, something changes at the root of their relational programming. Emotional connection stops being a liability and starts becoming a form of agency. They begin reaching out first. They start the deeper conversations. They bring emotion into the space instead of avoiding it or deflecting it. And you have to understand, that's not a surface level shift. It's a reorientation of their entire emotional compass. Avoidants are wired to equate vulnerability with danger. Many of them grew up in environments where emotional expression led to rejection, criticism, or worse, manipulation. So they learned early, if you want to survive, you stay silent, you stay composed, you keep your feelings inside where no one can use them against you. That became their emotional survival manual. But when they enter a space where they're not being judged, rushed, or emotionally smothered, when they feel emotionally secure, they start to rewrite that manual. Vulnerability becomes not something forced upon them, but something they offer freely. Not because they're trying to keep their relationship alive, but because they've started to believe they deserve to be seen. You might hear them say something like, I've been thinking about what you said the other day and it stuck with me. Or maybe I realized I shut down during that conversation and I want to unpack that. For someone else, those statements might seem simple, but for an avoidant, that is deep work. That is emotional labor they would have avoided, even sabotaged in the past. Now they're not running, they're reaching. And here's the kicker. When they initiate emotional intimacy, they're not just trusting you, they're starting to trust themselves. That's the breakthrough. Avoidants don't just avoid others, they avoid their own feelings. They compartmentalize pain, deflect discomfort, and live in the illusion that needing no one is the highest form of power. But in this new space of safety, they begin to realize that real strength isn't found in isolation, it's found in integration. In showing up emotionally, not because it's demanded, but because it's aligned with who they're becoming. Philosophically, this is the shift from self-preservation to self-expansion. Love is no longer a battlefield where they must defend their ego. It becomes a mirror where they learn to see themselves more clearly, not as broken, not as distant, but as capable of deep, mutual, evolving connection. And you can tell it's real because it's not performative. It's not reactive, it's consistent. They don't just crack open in moments of crisis. They begin weaving emotional depth into the daily rhythm of the relationship. That's what real transformation looks like. Not the occasional breakdown of walls, but the quiet dismantling of them, brick by choice. So here's what you need to remember. When an avoidant initiates emotional connection, it's not just an act of love, it's an act of redefinition. They're not just learning how to be close to you, they're finally learning how to be close to themselves. And that changes everything. When an avoidant feels safe enough to love, they begin doing something that's almost paradoxical to how they've lived most of their relational life. They start revealing their flaws. Not in a way that demands validation, not in a way that screams for rescue, but in a way that says, I trust you enough to see me without the armor. And that's revolutionary for an avoidant. Because for most of their life, emotional safety was linked to perfectionism, to being in control, to managing how much of themselves they let the world or a partner see. Vulnerability wasn't something they practiced. It was something they avoided at all costs because in their world, being emotionally exposed always came with a price. Rejection, abandonment. So they adapted. They polished the surface. They minimized their needs. They became the expert at wearing masks that said, I'm fine, even when they were internally unraveling. But here's the key shift. When they finally feel safe, they stop curating their identity and start revealing their humanity. That's how you know the walls are coming down. They'll admit when they're anxious. They'll own when they're wrong. They'll confess that they've been struggling, not for pity, but because they've finally reached a level of emotional maturity where connection matters more than image. And this is where real intimacy is born. Because intimacy doesn't come from shared interests, matching playlists, or even physical closeness. Intimacy comes from shared imperfection. From those moments where someone says, here's the part of me I usually hide, and I want you to see it, not so you'll fix it, but so I don't have to carry it alone anymore. That's what avoidants start doing when love feels safe. They drop the script. They risk being misunderstood. They take off the psychological makeup and say, this is who I am. Unfiltered, unprotected. And I'm okay if you don't always understand me. I just need you to stay. It's a massive psychological shift. What they're really doing is moving from performance-based safety to authentic safety. The first one says, if I'm good enough, I'll be loved. The second one says, even in my mess, I'm still worthy of love. That's not just a new behavior. That's a new identity. That's what psychologists call self-acceptance, the willingness to be seen without shrinking, defending, or escaping. But don't make the mistake of thinking it will always look poetic. Sometimes it looks like them shutting down mid-conversation and later coming back to say, I wasn't trying to dismiss you, I just didn't know how to process that in real time. Sometimes it's clumsy, sometimes it's quiet, but it's real. It's the most honest version of them you've ever seen. And when you witness that moment, when the avoidant drops the armor and lets you see the raw, unpolished version of who they are, don't overlook it. Don't rush it. Don't shame it. Because for them, revealing a flaw isn't weakness. It's a sacred risk. It means they've chosen truth over image, connection over control. So here's the reflection I want to leave you with. When an avoidant shows you their flaws, it's not a sign of breakdown, it's the beginning of breakthrough. That moment isn't about what's wrong with them, it's about what's finally right within them. And if you can hold space for it, you're not just witnessing love, you're witnessing healing. When an avoidant finally feels safe enough to love, one of the most significant and surprising things they begin to do is make future plans that include you. Not casually, not conditionally, not as an abstract idea to keep you hopeful, but as a real, tangible step toward emotional investment. You see, avoidants live in the present because the future feels like pressure. Long-term commitment has historically felt like a trap, not a promise. They've trained themselves to avoid dependency, not because they don't care, but because deep down, they fear that getting too close means losing control, or worse, losing themselves. To them, committing to a shared future used to mean surrendering their autonomy, their identity, their peace. But here's what safety does. It rewires that narrative. When an avoidant begins to feel emotionally secure, the future no longer feels like an obligation. It becomes a canvas, and they start to paint you into it. That's no small shift. That is a psychological and emotional breakthrough that redefines how they relate to the concept of belonging. Instead of avoiding conversations about next year, they initiate them. Instead of evading discussions about moving in, meeting family, or life goals, they engage. Not out of pressure, not out of people-pleasing, but from a place of alignment. Something internal clicks. The very idea that once suffocated them now starts to inspire them. That's transformation. And make no mistake, this doesn't always happen in grand gestures. Sometimes it's as subtle as saying, let's plan a trip next summer. Or when we retire, I'd love to live by the ocean. These are more than words. They're evidence that the avoidant is not only emotionally present, they're emotionally projecting into a future that includes connection, stability, and continuity. It means their survival mechanism has shifted from escape to integration. This is also where philosophy and psychology meet, because making future plans is not just about logistics, it's about belief systems. It means they're starting to believe that love can be safe and sustainable, that it doesn't have to be intense and short-lived, that they don't have to sabotage to protect themselves. For the first time, the future is no longer something to flee from. It's something they're starting to build with you, brick by brick, intention by intention. But you'll notice it in their language. It changes from I to we. It changes from someday to when. The way they orient to time shifts. Because now, time isn't the enemy that threatens their freedom. It's the structure that supports their connection. This shift is massive because time for the avoidant was always a source of anxiety. Now it becomes a symbol of trust. But let me be clear. This doesn't mean they've conquered every fear. It doesn't mean every step toward the future will be confident and fluid. What it does mean is they're trying. And for the avoidant, effort in the direction of connection is never casual, it's courageous. It's a decision to stop running from what they used to fear and to start walking toward what they want to grow. So when they begin to talk about the future, when they start including you in that vision, don't just hear it as a plan, hear it as progress. Recognize it as one of the most powerful signals that love, when safe, becomes not just something they endure, but something they choose. And here's what I want you to remember. When an avoidant starts building a future with you, they're not just planning a life, they're rewriting a legacy, one where love doesn't imprison them, it liberates them.